This is the second panel for the 2016 Wisconsin Film Festival. The title is Finding the Stories. So this panel is sponsored by Story First Media and Film Wisconsin. I'm Michael Nielsen. I'm with Story First Media, and we're a collective of filmmakers and marketers that do content for, like, film and video content for both brands and entertainment. We, obviously, at Story First Media, we do all our production here in Wisconsin as well. So in addition to the commercials and whatnot, we also do independent documentaries and feature films. The one that's in production right now is we have materials over there if you're at all curious. It's about the Tom Monfils murder in Green Bay in 1992. It's a documentary. So we're all making stuff in Wisconsin, and we're going to talk a little bit about, or at least we have connections to Wisconsin in some way. So yeah, we're going to talk about the stories now. What I was trying to go for here, and what I like about this idea is, whenever you're creating any sort of project for film or video or anything like that, you're either starting with a blank page with like a narrative film, with something where it's completely fiction and you got to start from nothing and create something, or with a lot of the folks on here who are doing documentary, the world is that blank page, right? I mean, like, you're starting with so much possibility, and eventually it's all going to end with just abandonment, right? Because you're never actually done, in a sense. You're just, you give up on it. You're like, this is where it's going to be now. So what I'm interested in is finding out and charting that journey for everybody, like starting from the conception to where it is now, where people are watching it. So I guess I'm going to introduce the panelists real quick. And we have Roger Deutsch here. He is the director of The Boy on the Train. And we have Holly DeRuyter, and she actually is a juror this year, but she had a film last year, a documentary called Old Fashioned, which is the story of Wisconsin supper clubs. And we have Emir Cakaroz. He did the film REVZA, which is a short documentary that is in the film festival this year. And then we have at the very end over there Tony Massill and Pablo Alvarez-Mesa, who directed the feature documentary Frank and the WONDERCAT. And I don't know, at the end maybe we'll just go through real quick and just mention when things are showing so people can, if they want to come check it out, as they should. So I want to start really broadly with that idea of that initial germ. And obviously we've got 3 documentaries and one feature narrative here. Starting with the narrative maybe. Did you start with a blank page, or were you handed a script, or how did this start for you? Take me back to the very, very first moment for you. And use your microphone if you could.
Sorry. I always forget to do this. It's actually a little bit long story. I generally make experimental films, and one of the things I do, or historically have done, is I shoot a lot of film, and I only edit a story out of it many, many years later. And I look at what I've shot, and I see people that I've shot, and I create a narrative around them that is not true. But I narrate it with my own voice so that people actually program them as documentaries, even though I send them to film festivals as narratives. I was making one of these films a year and a half ago, and I had shot some footage of a boy on a train in Budapest in 1991. And I decided to tell a very nasty story about him and say that he's really a budding fascist and all sorts of nasty things about him. And then one night, as I was editing this section, I inhabited this boy. And I said, well, he's now would be mid-30s. And I wrote myself a letter from him, which was a extremely funny letter, if I do say so myself, but which insulted me over and over again, which was great fun to write. And I sent this letter to a few people who had been sort of my consultants while I was working on this. I always work with other, film people and ask them their advice. And even though everybody knew, so the letter he wrote me, he said, I saw your film in Budapest at its world premiere, and the stuff you said about me was horrible, and you never should have done that, and you had no right to do this. And I sent this letter then to these people who had been my consultants with no comment, and I pretended that it came from Hungary. I put a .hu return address on it. All 3 of the people believed it was true. It was almost as if it was like one of my films where people believed something that they knew it wasn't true because they knew I hadn't even finished the film, so I couldn't have possibly had shown it in Budapest. But at that point I said, I'm on to something. So that started me writing a story about an experimental filmmaker named Roger Deutsch going to Budapest and showing his film, and then being confronted by one of the characters. So that was the germ of it.
That's fascinating. So that largely then, the narrative largely came out of, like, in a sense, character research for you. I mean, like, just exploring this character in a sense.
Yeah, I really was. I mean, I really inhabited him that night. It's one of these strange things that happens every once in a while when I'm writing screenplays. I just become that character, and then I know I'm on the right track when I literally become that character. And he became a very interesting character. So he's the lead character in the movie, and except for the guy who plays me, who I also made up. He's not really me. He just has my name.
That's fantastic. Holly, your documentary from last year. You've shown that around a lot now. Take us back a little bit to the earliest incarnation of that for you. When did you first have the thought to make Old Fashioned?
Well, Old Fashioned kind of came about because I'm originally from the Green Bay area, and I went to Chicago for school, and I didn't think much was going to change culturally. I'm like, I'm still in the Midwest. It's just going to be a big city, and I showed up at college wondering why people weren't going out for fish fries and nobody had brandy. Not that I was drinking at the time. It was just a weird situation. I was asking for time machines. That's a very Northeast Wisconsin thing. I think my roommates thought I was crazy because I was asking for time machines to go get money from. So it just, and I had, some of my best friends were here in Madison, so I would take the bus up and I would be like, whoa, like Wisconsin, it's a trip, you know? So we started talking about the culture, and we started talking about how the supper club kind of embodies a lot of these things I was noticing that were special about Wisconsin. And I was in film school at the time. I didn't have a car, so I was like, that would be a good film. And you just kind of shelve it in the back of your mind. And then, like, I don't know, like 8 years later, I started dating my now husband. We were talking about creative projects we were wanting to do, and I mentioned to him about this supper club film I wanted to do and how I hadn't done it yet because I didn't have a car and he had a car, and he just let me, you know, he's like, you should go make this. So that's when all the research started, and it took me 6 years to make, just because it was a side project, and it was a bigger challenge than I had anticipated.
Yes. Well, and that moment you said where you kind of shelve it, but you're like, that might be an interesting film. Was that just because you yourself, being someone who fished out of water, it's like, I want something that I can just say, like, here, everybody, this is what I'm talking about? Or what made it something you want to shelve like that?
Well, I just was thinking, like, oh, supper clubs, they're so visual. They're so beautiful, the neon lights, the red leather plush, you know, booths. It's just a great place, great characters inside. So I just, as a filmmaker, you're just like, oh, that has, like, all the elements of a great story. And I also felt like if I had these questions and I wasn't able to find all these cultural answers to what I was wondering about, that other people had these questions too. So I just thought there's a potential audience, and at the time nothing had been done on supper clubs, and it was a great visual piece. So I was like, okay, let's do this. And you also have to love your subject because someone once posted this on Facebook, and I saved it because it's like the creative process, and the first step is, I love this, or this is awesome. And then the second part is, this is hard. And then the third part is, this sucks. And then the fourth part is, I suck. And then you do it all over again. And then it's like, this is amazing. This is hard. This sucks. I suck. And you're seriously, like, making my film, I went through that, like, probably hundreds of times, where there's, you know, it's just the creative process.
Yeah, for sure. Emir, you teach at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and so tell us the story of, like, why, like, where your documentary came from. What was the earliest incarnation for you?
So I would say in 2003, I watched a documentary about. It was a British film. The guy was telling his family's immigration process from India to England. So my family. Originally from Bulgaria, they immigrated from Bulgaria to Turkey in 1971. So kind of experienced the same things with this guy, like this guy. And I said, oh, this is a great film subject. And I want to do my family's immigration process, the story of my family's immigration process. And the problem was there were a lot of things to cover, and I wanted to use different type of forms. So I started to think what I can do. It took maybe like 3 years, 4 years to figure out what I can do about my family's immigration. So I decided to make a kind of a trilogy, 3 different films. So in 2012, I made a documentary about how they immigrated from Bulgaria to Turkey. It's mostly telling about the past, what happened in the past. And this film, REVZA, is mostly how is my mom is doing in the new countries, representing the present. And the third one is going to be the future. What will my family or my mom is going to do in that country?
So is the first film of that trilogy observational as well, or because
No,
you're dealing with
it
the
was
past?
it's not an observational documentary. It was mostly it based on 2 photographs. It's called 2 photographs. It's based on the first photographs. My parents were taken together, and the last photographs my parents were taken together before my father died. So it was like a short film, 8 minutes long. It was covering all this process.
That's great. Fantastic. And you guys down at the back there, I mean, you guys' documentary sounds awesome. I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds fantastic. What was the germ of the idea for you guys in doing Frank and the WONDERCAT?
There's a long answer and a short answer. Short answer is Facebook, where all great documentary research begins. And the long answer is that we had friends in Pittsburgh, where our film takes place, and our friend Stephanie was a librarian in this small little suburb of Pittsburgh, where our subject Frank used to come in all the time and talk to her. And because Frank was kind of well known in the town, Stephanie was posting kind of comments about that Frank had come in, and she was excited and talking about Frank and his cat Pudgy Wudgy. And she was starting to write all these things on Facebook, and all these likes and comments, and all these people were, kind of bringing up memories of Frank and Pudgy Wudgy, and somebody tagged Pablo and said, "Pablo, you should make a documentary about this." And Pablo was like, "What the hell's a Pudgy Wudgy?" And we kind of went from there, and they told us about Pudgy and how famous this cat was in Pittsburgh. And the thing with our subject is that he recorded his whole life with VHS and film and pictures and all this kind of thing, and he had a compilation DVD of his life with Pudgy Wudgy, 2 hours that he edited VCR to VCR.
And that's the film people will see in theaters right now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's a trip.
Exactly.
We can get you that DVD if you want. But so anyway, so that was the initial thing, was our friend Stephanie sending up this 2-hour compilation of Frank's life that he had recorded himself with the cat, and we sat there and watched it and thought that there was something there, that the footage itself was quite beautiful and funny and very strange and kind of I don't know, magical in its own way, and so that was enough for us to go down, to get a car and drive down to Pittsburgh from Canada, where we were from.
That's fantastic. So I guess starting down there again, obviously the next step then there is, okay, you've got the idea. What's that first step in trying to figure out what shape the idea is going to be? I mean, what are you going to carve it into? What criteria do you have to make choices? What's the first kind of the thoughts that you have when you start?
Yeah. Well, I think it was because like form and subject matter, they are hopefully interconnected. So when we get all these VHS tapes, I mean, and a DVD, but like all that aesthetic starts informing the scope of the film and like the scope of what, what can fit well with that. So from the get-go, we decided to shoot with old video cameras and stick to the 4:3 aspect ratio rather than like HD wide and all of that. So it's interesting because like it's limitations, and we knew we were gonna limit this, but at the same time, then you can really really get into a way of shooting and a way of seeing, and we're in a little town, and it actually works really well for what it was, for the subject matter. So we go there after having seen all these tapes. We meet Frank. He's really, really amazing. I mean, it's hard to read him initially, but then like the more we got to know him, and we spent the first trip was 1 week, and we went 4 times during a few years. We got to know him, very well, and the more we knew him, the deeper sort of like the roots of the story got. Like it was no longer just about a man and a cat. It had to do a lot with family, with place, with history, with rural to urban transition. It had politics in there. It had a bunch of different colors, you know. So yeah, I think we just like, so just to make it short, like we got there with an idea and with a set of limitations, and that allows us to explore deeper through one vein rather than going there and shoot everything, you know.
Yeah.
So it's, I tend to have that, like get an image,
Right.
like an image that is, that promises avenues, and then go there and really look for how can we shoot this and how can we do this in an integral way and in an aesthetic way that makes sense. Like having subject and form speak to each other in its most, like in an ethical way, in a creative way, in a process that actually makes sense for us and for the people that we're working with.
Looking back, are you able to pinpoint kind of, I mean, I know it's hard to be analytical in the moment and it doesn't work, but like looking back, you say an image that has promise. Yeah. What are you looking for? What's your finger up for, you know?
Yeah, well, actually, that like it totally happened when we were there. The second day, turns out that he's a volunteer at the high school football league, like the high school football, and he's a flagman at a downs counter. And it was amazing to see him so active. He's an 82-year-old man, so he walks like this, like great, you know, like super interesting relationship to young kids, and like it was really beautiful. And so when we saw that, it was like, okay, this is going to be the film. This is the center in which everything else sprouts from, and the film is going to be about a downs counter who turns out he's got a cat and all this other stuff. So while we're shooting that scene in the school, we somehow, like, we meet up and like, okay, there's going to be a film about this, and okay, let's go and shoot it that way, you know, like cover it really well, really get this, and so it was in the moment. And the second day, we sort of like thought that was going to be the structure. Turns out that we worked on that edit, like structuring the film according to that logic for a year, and it was not working. It was just not working. Like the films are interesting things in which, like first, like you really need to read well where the film starts and you end, you know. Mm-hmm. The film sometimes requires things and starts asking things from you and from, you know, the world. Yeah. But it's the film. And you sometimes want to impose things on the film, but it's you know. And those things are sometimes mutually exclusive, you know. Like what fits the film is not going to fit you, and what you want doesn't fit the film, you know. So like we really wanted that, and it was like that moment decision that we're like, okay, it's a football film. Turns out so it didn't work, and Tony was the editor of the film, and we're like looking cut after cut, and it was just not working. Tony like undid everything, and so it's really hard once you edit something because it's like you're stitching a fabric, and you start looking at patterns, and this pattern works. That pattern is a scene, you know. So like after working so much, this one works and this one works, and you start like stitching it as a quilt or something, and it's as an editor, it's really hard to undo that quilt and forget about those patterns and forget about those squares and look at the fabrics again. It's super hard. That's super, super hard. And I really admire what you did, because I cannot do it. I mean, like, I edit too, and once I get those little squares, I'm not going back.
Yeah,
you know,
it's scary.
Like, it's so hard. You have to unlearn.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
So Tony had to undo this, unlearn it, go back to the strings, and stitch it up again from scratch. And it was now more about what we had initially thought, that the film should be, you know, before that football thing, on the moment.
Yeah.
So it turned out again to be about a man and memory and place and home and blah, 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 which is way more open, and the film allows for that better than what we sort of like imposed on the film that day, that it was going to be about football. So it's that dialogue between film and you. Like, what is the film? What is the story? What is the world allowing for that? And where do you end? I don't know.
Yeah.
But you need to learn that as you go.
And I'll mention real quick before we go on, I didn't mention earlier, I will open up for questions shortly, so go ahead and think of those, and we'll open those up as well. Emir, so you brought up this idea of these two images of your parents together and then your parents together again. Was that your kind of initial framework, your limitations, and you knew there was a story between, or where did you go after that journey?
That was actually my first film. So I wanted to do something related with memory, you know, and I just thought what would represent the memory best, you know. Yes, like moving picture is amazing, but I think one still picture can carry lots of meaning and deeper meanings, and I think it's the best reflection of memory. And I thought, okay, I'm going to use still pictures, but I didn't want to use kind of a PowerPoint slide, like a bunch of pictures. And I just started to think what I can do about this. And I suddenly thought about, okay, why I don't use the first pictures they were taken together in Bulgaria and tell about their story, what kind of life they had in Bulgaria. And later on I found another picture my parents were taken last time, the final picture they were taken together just before my father passed away. And this time I talk about their difficulties they experienced in Turkey. So 2 different pictures represented 2 different lives in 2 different countries. That was the thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then so with this film now, where does that branch off from that first film?
So this film is kind of the present. I wanted to represent how my mom is doing right now and how this immigration process affected her life and our life, our family's life. And I thought about that, which style would go best, and then observational films. That I mostly do observational documentaries. 2 photographs was kind of exception, but and I decided to go the observational documentaries plus also like not just observational, participatory. I would say my participation is also important in that film too. The REVZA, which is going to play on Sunday. Yeah, I went there. I knew it, what I'm going to film most of the time because I know her daily routines. But most of the time, what is magical about documentaries is like kind of things can develop unexpectedly. You know, sometimes it is very good, sometimes it is bad. But luckily to me, the things are developed very well. There were a lot of scenes that I didn't plan, I didn't really see it's coming, and it happened perfectly fitted. For example, my mom's washing machine was broken, so she needed to do laundry with her hand, and I made a greatest interview with her, or something like that.
Yeah. So and given that you're, I think the only one up here that we would classify as truly observational, entirely front to back with your documentary, how open are you to like any story that comes of that? You know what I mean? Like, what are you looking for anything in particular, or are you just taking what comes?
Well, of course, I have an idea. I want to convey what is this person is doing, who immigrated from a different country. She has been living like by herself for like 20, 30 years, and what kind of difficulties she experienced. So they were all my themes. Based on these themes, I evaluate my images. I never let it go my themes away. That was my foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly, you mentioned that one of the early kind of thoughts for you was that the visual nature of these supper clubs. Can you take me a little bit more kind of like after that initial idea, what limitations, what framework did you impose to go like, okay, here's how I kind of start making choices as to how this becomes something?
Yeah, our first step after having this idea was to go out and visit supper clubs, even though I had been to a million of them growing up in Wisconsin.
Fun
research. It was kind of like what Pablo was saying. Yeah, it was very hard. It was very hard. But spending time with your subject, because you're like, oh, great, I have this idea, I have this story, and then when you start spending time with your subject, that's when you begin to realize, I thought that the story was here, but it's really more this direction. So I think there's so much value, and you can't so many people just want to run out with a camera and start shooting. And then you just end up with a bunch of footage that you can't really use. So I find great value in spending time with my subjects, really getting to know the story. And then I went to film school, and they really drilled it in our brains that we should write proposals, which is, I hate paperwork. I hate writing stuff, especially when it's a documentary. You're basically writing a fake story. Like, this is what I hope is going to happen, and I hope to capture. And I'm like, I hate this. But it's actually really helpful because it really gets your brain working about the visuals, what you want to see, the stories you want to tell, and where your holes are. You're going to start being like, oh, this doesn't work at all. So that just starts, it just helps your brain to start that storytelling and ideas of what you want to capture. Because especially when you're shooting documentary, you're out in the field and things are just happening. And you're just like, there was one time, if you're not ready and have an idea of what you want to capture, the moments are going to pass and you're going to miss it. So Yeah, it's, you know, but the reality of it is you write that proposal and you spend so much time on it, but the end product usually looks nothing like that. Just because documentary filmmaking is like, you're like, oh, we're going to go and we're going to shoot. We're going to go get A, B, C, D. It's going to be great. And you come back and you're like, whoa, we got A, H, X, G, and X. What? Like, I don't know what we're going to do with that. Like, but because you have a good idea, you're really immersed in your subject, you really know the story, that's what keeps you sane in the edit, where you're like, we can do something with this. We can make it work.
You got to get a lot of trust from your team that's like, we can guarantee we're going to have something. There will be a film at the end of this.
It was exposed, right?
Right.
There's audio there. Okay, deep breaths.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
okay, it's gonna be okay.
But so you mentioned though that kind of idea again of like spending time with your subject up front, and then that alerts you to different directions that you might want to take from what you conceived. Do you know? Can you relay one of those moments where that happened for you, maybe? Or
Yeah, we really wanted. It was gonna when I was gonna make this film, it was just gonna be a short, and it was just gonna be kind of like focusing on one supper club and be like, oh, look at this unique style of dining in Wisconsin. And I started going out in the field, and I'm like, focusing on one supper club's not gonna work. They're so different. We need to show how there's a variety in architecture, the owners, how they run them, the interior design. So there was just so much to cover. And then I also, in the meantime, I was doing a lot of researching. At the time, there was no books on supper clubs, so I was reading old newspaper articles and just books on Wisconsin food and culture. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's this amazing woman who knows all this information about foodways in Wisconsin, and there's this amazing man that works at the Historical Society that can give me all this information. I'm like, this film is becoming something that I didn't expect it to become. And it's good to find that out earlier on, rather than just go out and shoot a bunch of stuff and be like, what are we doing? Like, whoops.
mindlessly just like, I don't know, we'll shoot something here.
It looks pretty.
Exactly.
But it's like, well, what's your story?
Yeah. And Roger, so having done a fiction film, a narrative film here, but from that fascinating character research up front, you eventually imposed some sort of narrative on this, as you said. How did you decide what that narrative was going to be? It sounds like it was somewhat similar to just basically what the research came from, and sending the letter off to the friends and then believing that it was true and that this person did that. But tell me, how did that become what it is now?
It's a difficult thing. I mean, almost all of my films, whether I've made documentaries and narrative films, and I've been a screenwriter for hire. And everything I always start out with is very, very formal. And I decide that it's going to go from A, B, C, D, whatever, and it's going to end here. And this scene, every scene is going to be 7 minutes long with a 1 minute thing in between. I'm very influenced by, 12-tone music, I guess.
Sure.
And then what I do is I start breaking all the rules. And but what that does for me, that formal thing, is it makes me feel comfortable because I have this thing that I can, this clothes hanger that I can hang everything from, and I know I have a beginning and a middle and an end, and I know that works as a narrative, and then I can play with everything in between, and then it changes completely. Because I start writing dialogue, I start getting into a character's head, and when he says something, then that changes the dialogue that the other person's going to say, and then it goes back and forth, and I have to keep redoing that, and dialogue for me, is the key to my kind of narrative filmmaking. So it changed very much. And then when I get into rehearsal, it changes even more because I work with my actors, and I always say to them, if you can't get this line out convincingly after the third try, it's not your fault, it's my fault, it's the line's fault, and we're going to, write a new line for you. And then once we write a new line for him, then we have to write a new line for the other guy, because of course so it becomes a completely different film as you're working on it. Although if you actually looked at my first treatment, although I don't generally work in that standard way of treatments and things like that, but my first sort of sketch of the whole thing, you'll see the whole film is there, It just became something else based on who was in it, where I was shooting. And because I went to Budapest in June, and I was shooting the film by the middle of September, and I didn't know anyone in Budapest when I arrived in June. It was a very strange, this was a particularly strange, it's hard to talk about because it's not like a normal, it's not like a normal movie.
It sounds very intuitive, like just like you kind of have to trust that you know you're going to get somewhere in some way.
Yeah, well, you have to trust the people you're working with, and particularly with the main thing was getting the right actors.
Yeah.
And once I got the right actors, then I knew that I could work collaboratively with them, and we could shape the story based on their particular talents. And also, they had smart things to say. I encouraged them to say, Roger, this doesn't make any sense. You just like it like this, but it's not real. It's not what a real person would say. It's what you want that person to say. And I would say, you're right. That is what I'm doing here, and let's fix it. So it's always very collaborative at that stage of the game, and then everything changes one more time. And then in editing the film, everything changes again.
Yeah.
So you can see that, but the structure is always there. That original formal 12-tone structure is actually, you can find it. You don't actually see it unless you're looking for it, but it is there.
Yeah. I'm curious to see if everyone else here had a similar thing, because that clothes hanger analogy I think is dead on. Because like if you don't have that, a lot of times it feels like no criteria to make any decision whatsoever, right? So like starting back down there again, how important was finding that? You talked a little bit about having like a wrong turn early on where you thought it was going to go. But how important is it to adhere to something like that? Are you really rigid about it, or do you give it up at a certain point? How does that work?
For me, it's very important. I mean, as you're saying, for me, it's like more than for me, it's pentatonic. It's not chromatic. It's like I like it. Like, yeah, it's like limitations are the best thing for creativity, and I adhere to that. Yeah. And that doesn't mean stubbornness in a thing. I mean, like. You have your limitations, and then you open up to the world with that. But like at least knowing what your tools are, it's super handy. Having 3-4 tools and then playing along with them.
Do you just like intuitively have something like that you follow, or are you following some sort of predetermined story structure?
For each film, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Like each film will require a different camera, different relationship with your people, a different pacing, different everything. Each film has its own language, Yeah. So it's important for you to intuitively get that, like from the beginning of the story, have an image, and then see what do you need to complete that image, or to play with that image, what tools you need to hike that mountain, because it will be like tough, but like not to put too much in your backpack, because it's going to be a tough journey, and to be flexible, but to be ready to move around. So that happened to us with the film. Like, so we had an idea, like that we get that DVD, we love that old school stuff, all this, but we were open to a bunch of other things, but we had limitations from the get-go, and again, so it's that interplay between what the world has for you and what you want from the world, and how movie making plays, how it stitches, through that.
Yeah,
dance.
absolutely. For sure.
There was, for a big thing was how we were going to represent Frank and his world, because so much of the footage that we used was his archive footage, and it was so much in his experience that one of the limitations that we kind of thought of is that we were not into like sit down interviews where we have his best friend and his all these people, his family members, talk about him, because we wanted to have it exist within his own experience and his own kind of point of view. So that was one of the things that, even though we might knows this great information about Frank, or we could have got someone to maybe try to help us out and say, tell us that. That wasn't the kind of film that we wanted to make. We wanted it to exist, and so that kind of dictated how we used that archive footage. We didn't want it to exist in the past so much, in his head and his own narrative, and how he remembered his family, the cat, all those kind of things. And so those were important limitations to kind of think about, especially for editing. And otherwise, it would have been very challenging because there's just so much material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Emir, yours being again so observational, at what stage is it in editing then that you pretty much are looking for that clothes hanger, then that structure that you're going to impose on it, or are you even thinking about that when you're filming? And how important is finding that structure for you?
What do you mean close hanger?
What's that?
What do you mean close hanger?
Oh, like a framework, just like the structure of it, yeah.
Well, you have an idea when you start the film, of course, what you're going to film. I think you should know it, And later on, I'm talking about especially this specific style. You start the film, things kind of fit your plan. Sometimes, most of the time, they don't fit your plan. And, because you're also using the camera, like for myself, because I'm also using the camera, kind of give it decisions at that moment, like executive decisions at that moment. What should I do? Where can the film go? Because you kind of witness something there, it can totally change the structure of the film. Okay, right now film is going somewhere else different. Okay, I need to film that way. I think I start to shape the structure during the filming process just before editing. This is how it happens, because like the ways, the paths are changing when you film, the possibilities are changing, and I think you should give decision at that moment, so you don't miss them.
So then, when you actually do get into the editing stage, then how rigidly do you adhere to any sort of structure that you like? Do you decide, okay, I need a beginning, middle, and end. These are those, and I'm going to work within it, or how do you do that?
Again, it's an advantage of filming your own film, because I'm filming it, I transfer it, I watch it, I take notes during this transferring process. So my advantage is like filming by myself. So I know my footage, I'm very familiar with it, and I know the structure at that moment, and I start the edit.
Sure.
And it takes like pretty kind of shorter time comparing the amount of footage I'm dealing with. Like I dealt with 60, 70 hours footage for 47-minute project, and edited it in like 3 months. I think it's a pretty short time for that amount of footage. If I work with other people's footage, I don't think I would edit that short time period.
Yeah, and that's the truth with documentary for sure, right? I mean, that shooting ratio, 60 hours down to 47 minutes is
yeah.
It's like the research stage in writing, right? I mean, like that's, you're doing all that up front before you even roll cameras. Holly, tell me a little bit about, I guess for you as well, because you talked about a structure as well. At what point do you kind of try and really get that down, and how important is it at a certain point for you?
Yeah, I try to get down pretty early, because especially with documentary, you want to have an idea, and you want to have a direction that you want to go. You want to make sure that the shoots that you're going out on, there's a purpose behind them. So again, with that proposal early on, again, I don't like it myself, but I highly encourage it, just to get your story down, so when you're interviewing people, what you're asking them and stuff. So I find it to be very important to have a direction and an idea, but you have to go with the flow, just like he was just saying, where you might be like, oh, we were planning. There was one day, like, we were planning, we had the whole day planned out. We're hitting all these supper clubs, and we showed up at Turk's, and I was just like, we need more of Marge. Like, Marge, there's this key, like this older woman, and we were way far north, and I'm like, we just have to call these other supper clubs. We got to move things around, and you just have to go with the flow, because you're just like, there were some visuals there that we really wanted to capture that night, and you just really have to trust your gut. You really, really need to plan and be organized, but you kind of have to be okay with kind of throwing it out the window at any moment. So it's just trusting your gut. That's a lot of filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, and would you say part of that trusting your gut thing is trusting that, like, the structures or the ideas that you're imposing on this have come before you? So that's like, you're like, it's worked before. I know if I follow this in some way, it's going to, in some session.
Yeah. You just need like the clothes rack. You just need something stable, because nothing is stable in filmmaking.
Right.
Like, things will happen when you're making a narrative film. Something doesn't work out right. You didn't get a shot, or you just have to. It's a creative process, and especially when you're shooting documentary, you have to have something stable, or you will lose your mind, and you can just there can be so many different stories we could be telling, and you have to be really focused and know what you're talking about. So
yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more, but I'm curious if there's any questions up front yet that we can take from the audience, if anyone has any. It doesn't even have to necessarily be about story structure specifically, but anything? No? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Good. So I'll just repeat the question for YouTube. The question is basically for the rest of you here. How sacred do you hold the subject? Where do you draw the line between protecting them and what you want to do with it? Kind of take us down that journey, I suppose.
Can I actually answer, because you actually, I mean, you repeated what I said quite exactly, but this particular film is in fact an investigation of that practice, and the result of that investigation is I don't do that anymore. No. Yeah, and I used to think that, and then when I put myself when I inhabited this character, and I had him present questions to me that I was supposed to answer in the movie as a character named Roger, and I couldn't answer them because he was right. I had no right to take his life and do what I wanted to do with it. And this is something I've been doing for 30 years. So I just wanted to, as a sort of, and then I really want to hear what the rest of the people have to say about it.
Well, and I'm really curious, so does that mean no more documentaries from you?
Well, they were never really documentaries.
Okay.
They were, that was the thing. They never were. They were just, I just would see these things and I would then weave a story around these people that I had seen. And I had always worked with film that I had shot 10 or 15 years before, so I didn't even remember the names of the people.
Yeah.
I made up their name, I made up their background, I made up everything.
Okay.
But I don't anymore.
Gotcha.
I'm more on their side now.
I suppose going back that direction, Holly, how would you answer that question? Just the idea of,
relationship with their
With the
subject matter and the respecting them. The hardest thing with documentary is it's always like they always tell you don't get involved, but you do get involved. It just happens. But I think it's just there's this fine line you walk where you're kind of these people's friends and you know them, and but you also need to kind of have a business relationship with them too. A lot of times if subjects are, they don't want to talk about something, that's something you really want to capture. Usually it's just having a conversation with them off camera and understanding what they're concerned about and gaining their trust. But I've never really had a situation where I feel like I've really had to compromise or worry about like offending someone. I feel like everybody I talk to or interview, I feel like I gain their trust, and it's just a hard line to walk. But it's funny because it's like Therese Allen's in my film, and I love her, and we're friends now, and so friendships definitely bloom, and you're always connected to these families. You will the rest of your life. You'll hear from them. You'll send each other Christmas cards, and it's just kind of how it happens. You can't get that involved in people's life and not care, be connected.
Is that quick follow-up? Is that important to you? That like could you ever see yourself doing a documentary where maybe it's an unreliable narrator or somebody that you don't fully agree with, but you still have to depict them? How would you how do you feel about that? I guess
I feel like you just need to let them represent themselves as true as they can on camera. So when you present them, you're presenting their true self, and you have to be very aware. Editing is a very powerful thing, and you can make people say things that they didn't really say. So you really need to be mindful and respectful of your subjects. That's just something that I find important.
Yeah.
Different filmmakers, have different codes of ethics that they follow, but I think it's very important for me to not try to manipulate people's words.
For sure. Emir, what are your thoughts on this? Kind of the difference in the line between filmmaker and subject. How do you respect that? Do you have to respect that? What's your feeling?
Of course, you have to respect that. I mean, if you don't respect them, you don't respect yourself. You don't do this job. I mean, it's a documentary filmmaking. More specific to my film, It's about my mom. You know, mom is the most, I don't know, maybe sacred, the word she used, and most kind of respectable thing for most of the people, not maybe for everyone. But yeah, so it was about my mom. Especially my mom never likes my films that I make, so I needed to deal with that. I made a film about her before. So the first film I was talking, so she didn't like that one. I made this one. She didn't like this one either. But the thing is, the thing she's complaining about is not the. For example, she says, "Why did you show our house messy?" And I say that like, my mom, it is how it is. It's. I mean, I didn't show it messy. I didn't want to make it show it, but the house is like that. What can I do? I mean. She says, I would clean the house if I knew you were going to come. I was going to come. I come from America, from Turkey. It's not something, I just came from the different neighborhood in a 5-minute drive. So, this kind of things, like 2 films, she get, both films are a little bit sad, because it represents to me, I think, my mom's general kind of life condition and her character. But also, it also contains glimpse of happiness from the daily life too. So I try to keep this atmosphere a little bit dark and a little bit humorous moments in the film, and this is how I've tried to represent her.
Yeah, that's great. And you guys dealing with so much archival material as kind of your bedrock. How do you feel about this separation? I mean, you talked a little bit with regard to structure about is it you wanting to do this or the film wanting this, but when you bring a subject into that, how does that change things?
I mean, in the bigger scheme of things, for me, there's I think it was Albert Massill says you have to love your subjects, and I think that whether it's the definition of love is care or what that is, I think you have to care for them, obviously, and for us, that was a process of going every time we went through down to Pittsburgh. We'd see more and more of Frank's home videos, and you see his family life and start to hear about his ex-wife and stories, and you get to hear a lot of specific details about his life. And with those, you kind of start to figure out what the actual story that you want to tell and what is kind of a personal thing that he's sharing with you, or you start to negotiate what is part of the actual story and what is just kind of interesting to hear about his life. And maybe those things are not necessarily part of your kind of this structure that or this idea, that you start to do. I had, when I was making a short film a few years ago, I shot up in the mountains with this guy who lived up there in Canada and for a few weeks, and I came down with all my footage, and I started piecing it together and thinking about, oh, look at this great little thing, and I was starting to create a character of who he was. And I got a random email from his daughter who had, adult daughter, who had heard that was going to make this documentary. She's like, I'd love to see this film. And it shot me back into reality that this is a real person that I'm dealing with. And when you're editing with the footage for so long, it kind of, your subject becomes a character based on that footage you have.
Right.
And so for me, that was a really important moment to realize that this will live on, and that people that care about your character will see this, and this has repercussions. So as a filmmaker, that's always an amazing thing to remind myself for that. I don't know if you want to talk about the archive footage.
I'll just say that the power dynamics in representation are very tough. I mean, for me, documentary, I don't know, maybe all filmmaking, but documentary is the art of ethics. It's how, for me, each selection in each moment is actually how do we deal with this, because everything else is an aesthetic choice. What camera, what framing, what movement, what pacing, what all this stuff, what sound, all these things are aesthetic choices, but they, for me, come down to that relatable, that human contract. But knowing that there's a power dynamic there that is not even, and it's always there, and we say, or we tend to want to think that that we have access, or that they trust us, or trust all these things, but there's sketchy things, because there's always a need, and I don't know, you have to be very aware of that, and yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
there's many things there, and the whole thing of characterization that comes from maybe fiction filmmaking, and then it's imposed into nonfiction, and that idea of making characters out of people, and yeah, there's many slippery slopes there, and comes from tropes of filmmaking, a bunch of things. So I think nonfiction filmmaking is full of ethical considerations that are, for me, at the basis of the whole art of this.
I like that a lot, because I think that's a reason why a lot of nonfiction filmmakers, I think, spend a lot of time navel gazing, if you will, like trying to figure out, like, what right do I have to have this leverage over these people, and they don't even know the leverage I have over them, you know, sort of thing. And there's actually a book that, if you have never read it, it obviously the line between documentary and journalism, not 100% there, but you know, there is something there. There's a book though called the Journalist and the Murderer. Has anyone up here read this at all? It's from Janet Malcolm. Yes. Very good book, but it's a very controversial book, because the thesis of the book is that any journalist that is halfway intelligent knows that what they do is morally reprehensible, because they get the trust of these people, and then they're going to turn them into something. And it's basically an unavoidable thing. Even if you're turning them, even if you're making them happy, you're turning them into something. It's not them, and it can't be them. They are they. The film is them. It's a very interesting. I agree. It's like the bedrock of all of it. Yeah.
What's interesting is, actually, I remember that book had a great influence on me.
Yeah.
And precisely because that's when I said to myself, well, then I'm going to stop pretending I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to make this stuff up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a little bit of a crisis.
I highly recommend that book to anyone who's interested in the subject of documentary film, even though it's about journalism.
Yeah.
It's also it's just a great book.
Yeah. It's very short, but it's really, really great. Any other questions to start here at all, to get something else? I'm kind of curious. We've talked a little bit about changes in the road when you're building that narrative, but I'm curious if you've had any times where the narrative, and that you can maybe recount, where the narrative really was not the answer, and you had to lean on something that you couldn't really explain, if you know what I mean. Like we talk about that clothes hanger analogy. Moments where you had to throw the clothes hanger out. You talk about breaking the rules later. Can you remember any specific moments where you had to really just let it go completely? Or does that happen? Or anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Pablo talked about that kind of first year where we had this whole structure that we completely threw away. And about 2 years into shooting, Frank had a bit of an accident. He slipped and was quite injured for a while. And so we went down and shot more with him, thinking that this was going to be a part of the film. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't doing too well, and we went back a few times and shot with him, and we edited a whole second section of this film, and it became quite long. But we thought that this was going to be a big part of his life, or a big part of the story. And we had to come to a second realization that that was not part of it either. And that was a big thing for us, definitely, to realize that, I don't know.
That thing about like drama and making drama and like a whole bunch of conventions that we think we should fulfill as we try to make films or something. So it was a full third act, you know, and it resolved things and it opened things, but it resolved and like did a whole structure thing. And you think that you have to do this for some reason. I mean, we're new at this, so we're learning a lot, and I don't know. It's good to like really check what you're doing and for whom and why and what is this serving, if it's serving anything. But there's always there's always a reason that you're doing things. But why are you doing this? You know.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of time, you know, shooting and editing and going through things and in a delusion of something. And it was super important. We got to know him even better, and from that we got some scenes that actually made the film. But we went on a tangent that I think came from our anxiety of trying to resolve something, a narrative shape that was not from the film, that was in our head.
Emir, do you have thoughts on that? On just like the
sorry.
That's right. Just like, do you ever have to like throw the structure out? Just like
I mean, the structure is, I would say, 60%, 50% narrative structure. I mean, things are connected to each other, cause and effect relationship in my film. I would say the other 50%, 40% is there because the moment is important because the moment is reflecting her life. You know, you cannot really connect the scenes to each other, cause and effect relationship, but the presentation of this moments kind of depicting a picture of her life. I would say that the scenes are there just for the moment. I would say not just connect them create a kind of structure, like a kind of dramatic arc.
Yeah. And in retrospect, after you make that decision and you see the finished thing, then like screening at the festival,
Yes.
Can you look back now and say that is now serving some sort of narrative purpose, or is it still just totally the moment for you?
Well, I mean, there's a reason I put it there.
Right.
I mean, okay, this shows how my mom kind of react to his son, or how she reacts when she watches TV. You know, it has reason there.
Yeah.
But when you connect these scenes together, it kind of doesn't lead you a kind of a climatic moment. I would say that.
Yeah.
You know, it has certain functions there for sure, but it doesn't go. The structure doesn't go like that.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah.
It doesn't build like that. It maybe I would say goes up, goes down, goes up, up, down.
Yeah.
This is how I build my structure. It seems more kind of realistic to me. When I try to build a kind of narrative structures with documentary films, this time you start to manipulate the things more. You know, like this time you try to fit the things to structure. But in documentary films, at least what I am doing, the things are not sometimes fitting the structure. You know, and you shouldn't force yourself to fit these things.
Yeah.
Because you can try to this time try to change the meanings of the scenes.
Right.
I don't know if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, I think so. Holly, did you ever? I mean, we talked about a couple of moments there, but like in a large sense, was there ever a moment where you just had to completely let go of that tried and true framework that you were betting everything on, and just go, this just feels right now, and I don't care if it hits the structure or not.
Like in post-production?
If that's
or?
where you would make decisions like that, sure.
Yeah, I mean, in post-production, we kind of, we had a structure down going into post-production, but then we were editing it, and we're like, this does not flow. It was just like clunk, clunk. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. That was the point where I'm like, this is horrible. I am horrible for making it horrible. Like, you just want to walk away. But, yeah, there was a lot of, you just have to step back, and you kind of, like what you guys are saying, you have to, like, tear apart the quilt, start stitching, okay, this is working, this isn't working, maybe if we do this. Note cards or post-it notes are a great investment.
Yeah.
So you sometimes you need to step away from the computer and write out the scenes or the storyline and get it on the wall in front of you, and you just need to start moving it around. I think that it just triggers a different part of your brain creatively. Rather than just sitting in front of the computer and just being like, I can't make it work. It's not working. So sometimes you just need to step back, and it's really powerful to bring people that haven't been on the project at all to kind of come in and just give you some ideas, because especially with my film, I shot a lot of it, and I produced and directed it and edited it. And at one point you're like, I know this is I'm too saturated in this. I need a fresh set of eyes. So I think there's a lot of value working with, a good editor. If you're directing your piece, have other people. Everyone's creative and has a lot of great input on these projects. So it's great to work with people.
Absolutely. And Roger, I mean, I don't know if there was any time that you just had to throw the structure out at all.
Yes, but when I throw the structure out, I throw the whole film out. I start many more films than I make. I start many more screenplays than I finish. At a certain point, I say, this is either not a good idea, or it's a good idea that I'm not the right person to execute.
That's key. Yeah.
And then I say, so I'm going to throw it away and I'll make another film. It's depressing,
Right.
It's one spends a few days at the bar afterwards, but that's basically, I throw it away.
Yeah. Any questions from the crowd here at all? Do we have time? We have time for maybe one or two more at all. Do you got one? Sure, go ahead. Sir. Yeah. Or are you? No, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. That's all right. I guess I'm kind of curious. When we talk about those things, you talk about note cards on a wall. Those sorts of devices, those sorts of tricks to let you visualize where the narrative is and how it's going. Do you find those things help at all up front, or are they more when you know it's not working and you need to diagnose something, I guess, and anyone who has
All the time. Use them
Yeah.
all the time. I'm
Yeah.
seriously like invest in Post-it notes or note
Yeah.
cards or whatever, because they're just like, even when you're working on your proposal, when you start writing, you're gonna be like, outlines. I love
Yeah.
outlines. Big fan of outlines. Just because this whole process, you're never done
Yeah.
organizing or figuring things out until you're like you said, you give up. You're like, this is it. We're
That's
done here.
It's abandoned. There
Yeah,
it is.
like
right?
this is the deadline's today, so it's done now.
Yeah. Any thoughts there?
Just, in Canada, grant writing is a full-time thing. Like that's like I write 99% of my time and then make films in 2%, and I'm a full-time filmmaker. So like it's like full-time writing, and that is exactly this. I mean, like you write and you think and you just like you deal with yourself and your holes and like your. So it's nice to go back to that writing and see what that log line was and like not get it's a blueprint and you go with an aim and see what the world will give you and then come back and see if it matches, and there's many things that surprisingly match. But it's nice to see it back when you're editing and you're lost and you're trying to stitch something that doesn't make sense and you're like, whoa, hold on, what was this? A little bit of a reset.
Yeah.
And so writing is good. And yeah, a log line, it's always nice. Just one sentence and tape it on top of, on a wall in front of you, and that's your north, you know.
Yeah.
And whatever, you can explore left and right and up and down and whatever, but always try to look at that, you know, from whatever angle you're at, even if it's super tangential. Just keep your sight there, you know, and come back to it later, or you know that you're far.
It becomes that criteria through which you make choices for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, and each scene won't be straight in. Like
Right.
it's nice to tackle it from all kinds of sides, but know that you're tackling that topic.
Right.
And then it starts working for you. Like the film starts making itself,
Yeah.
you know, with lots of work. But
Yeah.
And about the cue cards thing, I totally agree, and I'm really embarrassed to say that I didn't believe in them to begin with, and Pablo got me on the cue card train, the little like post-it notes and stuff. We had to just spend like after we threw out the second part, kind of journey of our film, and we were re-editing. We had to just get these cards, like tape magnets to the back of them, write down every single scene, and then every single little piece of archive we had. And just like throw them up on a magnet board.
But it's a whole ritual. I mean, like we painted a wall with magnetic paint. It's like it's ritual. You know, like if you're working and you need to work for this, like putting your hiking boots because it's a mountain.
And
right? Like treating it, respecting your craft.
And I think doing all those little things, I mean, it can kind of sound fairy, but it kind of up in the air. But it's like it was an actual thing that helped me kind of visualize what we had. And even though, you know, I have bins in my editing thing with all these labeled, it kind of takes it and makes it a physical kind of thing. And it was a huge, and we discovered things from that for sure. And it was a really important ending to the editing process and it was pretty close to the end. It was just like seeing those in little pieces of paper up on the wall. It was, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it definitely helped.
I hear you though.
One last thing is like with the scenes with those papers, and it was not a paragraph or it was not one word. It was a little description, like one sentence or a few, that gave you a tone of what that scene or moment is, and you psychoanalyze that scene or moment, and you really understand what's its purpose, and if it's there for any reason. And once you start making it concrete, then it becomes, you know. So it's good exercises for you to understand your own film, because again, like the film starts becoming a monster and it's out of control. It's an IV plant and it will get out of control, and you need to know what it's saying, you know. So psychoanalyze your scenes, and give it character traits. Maybe there's no people, maybe it's landscape shots, but psychoanalyze what this is doing. You know,
Right.
like they're all speaking about something, and they have a personality of some sort. You know, like try to understand what's that. So those cards were great. Like that's the map to your adventure up the mountain.
Right. That's great. Great note to end it on. Real quick, just could you guys all mention where people can see your films and when? When's the next time?
Yes, we have a screening today at 3:45 in Sundance 6. We have some tickets. If you want to go to that, we have 3 tickets. Come attack us, and we can give you those. And then our second screening is tomorrow at the Barrymore at 2:30. We also have tickets to that. that we would be happy to give to anyone who might want to come. So come find us if that's the fact.
Fantastic.
Tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Terrific.
My film was at the
That's
festival
BS.
last year, but oldfashionedthemovie.com. You can buy a DVD, you can stream it or download it, and we're also doing a tour around the state right now with the film, so you can check us out at a theater possibly in your area. So oldfashionedthemovie.com.
I wish I had thought of the free tickets for you guys, Gambit, but I didn't bring mine. It's screening tonight at Sundance 1 at 8:45. It screened yesterday, so I only have one more screening left, and I'd love to see you there.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks so much to all our panels.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you all for coming. Now go enjoy some films the rest of the festival here.